I pray, I feel my heart go deep.
I invite you to close your outer eyes. Get comfortable in your seat. Ground your feet into the earth. And start to breathe with intention. Breathing in light and love. Breath of gratitude. We are always safe in the center of our beings. I invite you to repeat with me 3 times, either out loud or silently. I am always safe in the center of my being. I am always safe in the center of my being. I am always safe in the center of my being. And then as we travel within to that safe center, and the center of your being is wherever you feel safe. Traveling a safe passage to the divine self, the higher self, the Christ within, the divine presence. As you make your way there, you can create a special series of doorways that you go through in secret at any time you can access. You might decide to create a spiral staircase or some magical steps to go deep within, to heal yourself, to heal your body, to heal your mind, to heal the world. So go ahead and create your path. You might already be there, or you might need a moment to find your way to that safe center, safe and warm in God's presence, as we are an expression of God, God's children. So find your way there into the silence, and we'll pause here and breathe. Let's take a few more breaths in this divine space where we're protected and nurtured. And then just as you created a unique passageway in, go ahead and go out in the reverse order. Perhaps going up the stairs. Just as you went down the stairs to go within, you go up the stairs to go without. Go back to your body. Maybe you open and close those invisible doors to come back to the exterior world where we all sit in unity and community here this morning, together as one. Breathing deeply, breathing in light, breathing out love, breathing in love, breathing out light. And maybe we start to bring some movement and awareness back to our physical body by wiggling fingers and toes, perhaps turning your head head very slowly, side to side. So as we come out of this meditation, we're feeling centered and balanced. God's children always. We can always return to the sacred space, the divine within, anytime that we like. Namaste.
Thank you all very much. It's an honor to be here. I've gotten to know Charles over the last year or so as we've worked together in the Magic City Acceptance Project. And I've been here before. I've met some of you, and I'm honored to be part of your worship this morning. Charles asked me to speak on spiritual social action. And as Stephen said, justice, the idea of social action, making the world a better place, resisting what we call evil and injustice in whatever forms they present themselves, that's part of what I feel my calling is, but I think is the calling for all of us. So I wanted to share with you today a little bit about what drives me, what cranks my tractor as I think about doing justice in the world. George Carlin, I already got a chuckle. George Carlin, not a theologian, but a great person to listen to sometimes, did a routine once on the Ten Commandments. And he talked about, his point really was that the Ten Commandments are about being nice to people. And he said the best parts of religion are about kindness and being nice to people. And as he went through the Ten Commandments, he talked about them, but he dismissed the parts that he called sort of religious, magic, hocus pocus stuff. So this is Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 and following. This is from the Hebrew Bible. God spoke all these words, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God," etc. I'm going to jump forward a little bit. "You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name." And after those 4 commandments, God gets to the 6 sort of social commandments. "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house or your neighbor's wife, male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." And those are often what we call the 10 Commandments. Now in Alabama, we have a special relationship to those because Judge Roy Moore keeps wanting to put them in courthouses. As much as I loved the George Carlin routine, I actually think that he and Judge Roy Moore have the same misunderstanding about the Hebrew Bible. And I love George Carlin. I try to love Judge Roy Moore. I really do. I'm working on it. God's helping me. But I think what changes our perspective when we read the Bible is if this really simple thing. I'm going to tell you this one thing, and if you remember this, you will be ahead of probably 97% of people in churches in Alabama who talk about the Bible. It's this very basic thing. The Bible was written by freed slaves. And if you ever forget that, then you're misreading the Bible. The Bible was written by freed slaves, and if you ever forget that, you're misreading the Bible, including the Ten Commandments. Actually, this is fascinating because today you can go into a Jewish household that celebrates the Passover, and during the Passover, the youngest child is supposed to ask, why is tonight different than all other nights? And the oldest person is supposed to respond this way: we were slaves in Egypt. They've been saying this for 3,500 years. 3,500 years. We've been slaves in Egypt. Not our ancestors were slaves in Egypt. We were slaves in Egypt. The people who wrote the Bible, their identity, regardless of how long after the events of the Exodus happened, their identity was that of freed slaves. And if we forget that, then we misunderstand the Bible. In fact, if we were to read the Bible chronologically in the order it was written, we wouldn't start with Genesis. We would start with Exodus. Most scholars believe that the oldest scriptures in the Bible were written, they're attributed to women. One is the Song of Miriam. The other is called the Song of Deborah. Now, Miriam was Moses' sister, and in the story of Exodus, the Hebrews are brought out of slavery. They escape Egypt through the Red Sea. God parts the Red Sea. They come through, and as Pharaoh's chariots are pursuing them, the waters close back over them. And standing on the shore on the other side, Miriam begins this song, and her song is, "Sing praises to God, for he has triumphed mightily. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." Later on in Judges, we have the Song of Deborah. She sings about another battle where a much greater force was coming to oppress a much smaller force. And while they were there in fear, God sends a flood. Mud sticks the wheels of the chariots, and the general's name is Sisera. He and his army flee on foot because God, again, has fought for the oppressed against the oppressors. So the oldest songs, most historical, critical scholars of the Bible say, the oldest parts of the Bible were written by women, written about a triumph of a smaller group of oppressed people over oppressors. That changes the whole perspective, in my opinion. So when we read the Bible, if we read the Ten Commandments, and we have these commands about not making images or idols of God, it's not just because God just doesn't think, oh, that's not a good picture of me. I mean, when I see pictures, when I take a selfie, I throw them all away because they look horrible. God's not that vain, okay? And it's not that God has something against art. But if you go to Genesis, you get an interpretation of why that is. Now, see, in Egypt, the Hebrew slaves were surrounded by idols. The Egyptians had what they called the Aeneid, the 9 gods who reigned over all things. Beneath them was Pharaoh. And if you can imagine, if you think about Egypt, you often think of the pyramids. You imagine that pyramid. Pharaoh's at the top, everybody else is on bottom. And all they had to do was look around at the idols. Who did the idols look like? They looked like the Pharaoh. They look like the nobles. They look like our religious tendency to make God over in our images. Today, we still have gods and goddesses, although usually they're on the front of magazines. They're celebrities, and you see them on the grocery store as you're going out, or you see them on television. What do we call the TV show where someone gets up and they sing their heart out? It's American Idol, right? So we know what God looks like. God looks successful, right? God looks wealthy. God looks powerful. And so that is idolatry. We make God look like us. That's our tendency. And the Hebrews coming out of slavery saw those idols all around them, and when they came into a new land that God was giving them, and they understood themselves as having been freed by God, they knew that if they made idols, they would just be creating the same system they left behind. God did not free them from slavery so they could create a new situation of oppression. They had to learn a way of being that didn't involve idols or saying God looks like this or God looks like that. So in the book of Genesis, in the story, in the first chapter, we have this story about how God creates 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. On the 6th day, God creates all the animals, including human beings, and it says, in the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So for the Hebrews, if you want to know what God looks like, you don't look at a statue that looks an awful lot like Pharaoh. If you want to know what God looks like, you look at your neighbor. Or you look at your enemy. So how would that change things? Oh my gosh, if I think about Alabama, if we put the 10 Commandments on courthouse walls and we were really to take it seriously, then when Syrian refugees came knocking on our door, we would say, oh, there's God. Better let God in. That's social justice. One of the other commandments, again, I love George Carlin, but he dismissed this as religious hocus pocus. I think if you hear this through the lens of freed slaves, you will hear it differently. The Sabbath. The Sabbath. Now, in Southern Christianity, oftentimes most Christians, their only exposure to the Sabbath is through Bible stories where Jesus is trying to heal someone on the Sabbath, and those mean old Pharisees won't let Jesus heal someone on a Saturday. Well, it wasn't those mean old Pharisees. Have you ever tried to make a doctor's appointment for a Saturday? Doesn't work. Unless you are bleeding from your neck and you go to the ER, unless you are having a serious medical emergency, you don't get medical attention on a Saturday. The doctor will say, come back Monday. You got to wait 2 days. So when Jesus was healing people on the Sabbath, he was making a particular theological statement. But in Jewish tradition, Sabbath is the first labor law. Everyone gets a day off. Everyone. In Exodus, it says your son, your daughter, your servants, your animals, the immigrants, all of you get a day off. In Hebrew tradition, not only does everyone get a day off, that means for those of you who are employers, you have to pay your employees enough that they can take a day off. Ooh. In America, saying that's pretty controversial because some people think the poor just need to work harder and longer hours. But according to Exodus, everyone gets 1 day off just to enjoy their life, just to experience the earth's bounty, just to have communion with God and each other. Everyone gets a Sabbath, no exceptions. They even go further in the Hebrew Bible. They build it into the structure of the universe because the land gets a day off. The land gets a Sabbath. Every 7 years, you let the fields lie fallow so that the poor and wild animals can have whatever they produce of themselves. Every 7 years, the land gets a Sabbath. What if we today looked at our world and we said, you know what? Lord have mercy. Does our land not need a Sabbath? Instead of having every ounce of wealth extracted from it, perhaps we need to set aside some places that are protected. Perhaps every now and then we need to stop and reevaluate how we're exploiting the earth. The earth gets a Sabbath in Jewish theology. And then every 7 cycles of 7 years is called the year of Jubilee. So every 49 or 50 years, all debts are canceled, all indentured servants are freed. Holy smoke. How about that for a policy suggestion for the United States? All debts canceled, all servants freed, all your student loans forgiven. You go out to the mailbox one day, you open it up, and it's like, oh, 0 balance owed. That's amazing. Oh, I feel lighter already just imagining that, right? Sabbath. Transformative stuff. When you read it through that lens, these verses are not just religious hocus pocus. They're theological statements tied to practical things, ways that we're supposed to live out our lives. It's not just don't kill people, don't commit adultery, don't steal stuff. Going through my daily life, I don't have a problem not stealing things, not committing adultery. It's not, or not killing people. Sometimes I want to kill some people, but the thing is, that's not that hard to do. But these others, idolatry, remembering that I need a break and everyone else needs a break, taking time, sacred time, to heal, to let the land heal, those are things that I find it much more difficult to do. These are the toughest commandments of the bunch. Idolatry and Sabbath. Our society tends to think of social justice as activism. Usually when we think of activism, we think of people picketing, carrying signs in front of a place, or protesting, or signing petitions, or getting out the vote, and those are all important parts of social action. In fact, I think if our churches did more of that, if they were more in tune with that, we would see huge changes in the world. We would be talking about things that oftentimes in polite Christian Southern society we have a difficult time talking about. Things like heterosexism, things like racism, things like white privilege and white supremacy, things like economics and poverty and mass incarceration. We'd be talking about things that make people a little anxious because then they're afraid you're about to tell them that we need to change things and they're not entirely comfortable because the status quo is pretty comfortable. But it's not about being an activist. This stuff is not rooted in protesting and picketing and being angry about stuff. This stuff is rooted in who we understand God to be and how God is active in our lives. Several years ago, sometimes I invoke people's names and I'm scared because I'm afraid they might appear, Glenn Beck talked about, he was angry about something, as usual, and he was talking about churches, and he would said, these people talking about social justice, they've infiltrated the churches. Infiltrated. Oh, I was like, oh yeah, people like, Martin Luther King Jr. and Oscar Romero and St. Francis of Assisi. I mean, you could go down, these people who are talking about justice, it's not some political agenda. It is a deep rootedness in the identity of God and the character of God that we see expressed from the Hebrew Bible all the way forward. It was interesting, in fact, the pushback he got was so strong that he decided this year to come to Birmingham, right, and do a March for Unity and try to claim the mantle of Martin Luther King Jr. because he knew he screwed up. I give him that credit. He knew he screwed up. Social justice, though, is a spiritual orientation to the world. Social justice is about who we understand God to be and who we are in light of God's character. It changes how we relate to the oppressed of the world. The fact is, if you look around and you look at other people and you recognize in them the image of God, it changes the way you think about how we live our lives. You can't look at someone struggling to cross the Mediterranean, seeking refuge, and then close your door to that person because that person could be God. You have to work for justice for other people because you understand your own identity as one who has been set free. One who has been free. And for you, that might look like any number of things. Freed from addiction, freed from shame, freed from oppressive ideology, freed from any number of things, freed from debt. But we have our own identity in God as freed people. And that changes the way we relate to the world. And the other one that I've mentioned earlier is just as important, sacred time, Sabbath. Because what I want for myself, a chance to put up my feet, a chance to enjoy the bounties of God's creation. The Hebrews had a phrase they often used when they talked about justice. It was everyone living in houses that they built themselves, enjoying the fruit of trees that they planted in the shade of their own fig tree, enjoying the fruit of their own vine. What a great vision. Everyone with enough, with earth's bounty. if we live in that vision and understand that character of God, it changes the way we relate to the world. That's why we do social justice. It's not a political agenda. It's a spiritual one. One last thing. I know a lot of people. One of the joys of planting churches is that I network with a ton of people across religious traditions, people of faith, people who have no faith, people who are on one side of the political spectrum or the other. One thing I've noticed is that if you are resolved to do the work of justice, you have to take a Sabbath. You have to stoke those fires with your spirit, with God's Spirit. And you don't do this under your own power. You have to do it under God's power. Because if you're driven simply by activism or simply by an agenda, you will burn out. It is too much work. It is exhausting getting up and confronting evil and oppression every single day. But if we are rooted in this vision of who God is, and we take that Sabbath time to reconnect every day, to pray daily, to connect with other people in that community where we share those values about who God is and God's character, that gives us the courage and the strength to keep going, to do the hard things that need to be done. So it's not religious hocus pocus. It's very practical stuff. And it's rooted in who we understand God to be and who we understand ourselves to be. You have been freed. Go and free the world. May we pray. God of us all, we give you thanks that your desire for us is not simply a set of rules, but abundant life. Life springing up from your Spirit. Lord, nurture us, help us to abide in you so that we can be springs of living water, springing up to refresh the world, to bring about healing and reconciliation, to bring light to dark places and justice to places of oppression. Where possible, Lord, let us be agents of your grace, bringing good news to a world that desperately needs it. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.